Welcome to the Micromobility Report podcast, where we discuss how we can all go further with less. I'm Phil Latz, publisher of the Micromobility Report.
And I'm Irene McAleese, co-founder of C-Sense.
Today we're talking with Phil Jones, chairman of PGA. Welcome, Phil.
Hi, good to see you both.
Indeed.
Phil, what first sparked your interest in active travel, including cycling?
I always liked cycling. When I was at school, I remember all my friends were starting to drive cars, and I had a shiny new bike. I think aged about 16, and everyone thought I was a bit of a nerd. But I still remember that bike. It was a Claude Butler with a white frame, and I absolutely loved it. So, yeah, I kind of like many people. I went away from cycling, I suppose, during my 20s, but rediscovered it in my 30s, and just thought it's just a great way of getting it. As someone said once, it's the closest thing to flying.
Oh,
which I think is a really nice thing to say. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely. So if we've got this right, Phil, we think it might be 44 years since you first graduated as a civil engineer.
True.
So what would you say would be some of the biggest changes that you've seen in cycling and other forms of active transport over that time?
Well, I guess I was a bit of a latecomer to the whole kind of planning for cycling. Really, it wasn't. My career's gone through lots of different phases. I mean, one of the early things I did, I remember I helped to build a coal mine. I mean, who does that anymore? I was quite a latecomer to the whole active travel thing. It was probably the mid 2000s when I started working in the field. So, which maybe says something. For a long time, doing transport and highways, it was just kind of ignored. It was the mode that everybody forgot about, actually, for a really long time. So the change has been quite profound. I think we've had this rediscovery of the bike, which 1897 it was first invented, the safety bicycle, I think, and it hasn't really changed very much, and we just forgot about it for decades. Not everyone's got the message yet, but they will.
So you'd say that things are getting better generally for cycling as things go on?
I think so. It's like, it's patchy, isn't it? And we go forward and we go back, and sometimes, but I think the great sweep of it, I think, is getting better. I would say, certainly in the area. I work mostly in the UK. I mean, PJ has presence in Australia too, and we're particularly strong in active travel there. But yeah, I feel across UK and Australia, generally things are improving slowly, not fast enough. But I think if you look back to where things were when I began working in the field, I would say there's a lot more acknowledgement of the importance of designing for cycling. I think that's recognised, even if we don't always do particularly well.
So let's talk a little bit more about your consultancy, transport engineering and placemaking, which I believe you started 21 years ago, and it now has over 130 staff. So that's an amazing achievement. What have been some of the keys for your business success?
Finding good people, I think. I mean, I firstly would say that these days I call myself chairman, and I don't get too involved in the kind of day-to-day running of the company. I've been very lucky to find fellow shareholders and directors who've taken on the burden of growing this thing. That would have never happened if it had been just me. But I suppose I do. Yeah, I hope that kind of my personal ethos still runs with the company. Transport engineering placemaking is quite an important thing to me. Although, as you say, I graduated in civil engineering, and in my core, I'm still an engineer solving problems. But I think we all operate too much in kind of little boxes of professional disciplines, and actually we're all here to try and make the world a better place. So having a kind of collaborative approach, I think, and thinking outside your discipline. We're all pretty well. Those of us, I hope, working in the field, you're intelligent people, and we can learn stuff. And even though I may not be a tree expert, I think I can appreciate the importance of trees in streetscapes, and maybe as an example, knowing about urban design, knowing about all kinds of aspects of the built environment. And I think that's how PJ tries to operate, is that although we're still quite small, we work in a kind of multidisciplinary way, despite that. And I think we also have an ethos of questioning the agenda. So, many companies, engineering companies, there's the rule book and they're there to apply the rule book. We always like to say, well, who wrote the rule book? Why were those rules existed? Are they still right? And maybe we need to rethink things for the society that we're in and the and the problems we face today. So yeah, I think we're hopefully a kind of questioning, out-facing organisation, and maybe those qualities have helped the company to grow and attract the kind of people who want to think like that.
Well, that's a very, very good thing. Now, just a quick follow-up. I'd like to ask you about some of your consultancy's most important achievements, or what you think are some of the best things. You're welcome to say designing coal mines if you like, but whatever, anything at all.
I wasn't even designing them. I was working on the shaft sinking contract. I was there supervising the concrete linings of the mine shaft. It was the most boring 2 years. Actually, no, it was quite exciting. It was quite exciting when you're going down the mine in a bucket. But I always think manual for streets was something that for me was quite an important project, and it's still a bit of a calling card, I suppose. And maybe, I was saying earlier about thinking outside the disciplines. Manual for streets, for those, it's still current today. It's free if you want to have a look at it. It's on the Department for Transport website. But it was the first time that our Department of Transport wrote a document about how to design streets as apart from roads. I mean, that was this first point. It said streets are not the same as roads, and I think we're quite lucky in English, and actually most languages do have this distinction between an urban street and a road, which takes you somewhere else, but isn't a place of itself. And so it was recognized that streets are different and we need a different book to tell us how to design them. And Manual for Streets was something that first talked about place being a kind of quality that it's really hard to pin down what is place, and everyone has a different definition of it. But if you say what place is important to you, I think you'd be able to answer that question. And streets can be great places. And so Manual for Streets, I think, was the first document that really tried to again encapsulate this idea that streets could be great places and could be terrible places, but we need better ones. So that for me was quite a highlight and led to a lot of things that kind of moved on from that. So, and then I guess more recently, I was particularly pleased. It was 5 years ago now, but to be asked by Lee Waters, the Transport Minister, to chair the 20 miles per hour task force in Wales, which proved to be very controversial in the end when he came in. But I think it's early days, but it's proven to be a success in its own terms, and I'm very proud to have been associated with that.
Yeah. Actually, it was interesting because we were lucky enough to speak with Lee Waters as well on the podcast. And one of the things that he talked about was, obviously you are going to get that political pushback when you're introducing change. But if you're able to talk about, this isn't just about creating cycling lanes or something like this. It's the concept of place and creating a place for people is much more meaningful, and it's very hard for people to argue against that. You're making the air quality better for everybody, or you're making the sense of where we live better. So if the Manual for Streets was really one of the first to start encapsulating that concept, I can see why you're very proud to have that out there. Yeah, that is huge.
I mean, it's really interesting. And, obviously it built on the work of others, and Professor Peter Jones and others who'd come up with the concept of, they called it link and place, to encapsulate these two functions of streets as a transport corridor and as a place to be. So it built on other people's thinking, and it's permeated. I mean, the whole movement and place paradigm, I suppose, is probably stronger in Australia now than it is in the UK. It's been codified. I know Austroads has movement and place guidance and developing more details, and New South Wales, Victoria, I think, have gone very strongly on it, and other states around Australia. So, it's a concept that's really, really caught on.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I think that in addition to running your business, Phil, you are on loads of different advisory panels. And so Phil Lutz and I were trying to sort of wade through all of these, and we got up to about 6, I think. And so we'd
Yeah.
love you to sort of rattle those off, tell us what they are, and then also tell us if you ever managed to get any sleep in between all these things that you're doing.
I'm a non-executive director of Active Travel England. So Active Travel England is an agency of our Department for Transport. So Department of Transport makes the policy and assigns the money, so that's all decided by ministers. But then the actual role of improving provision for active travel through the work of other agencies, local authorities in particular, falls to Active Travel England. So Chris Boardman is the chair, and he set up the board of directors, and he asked me to be on that, which is great. And that really is there to scrutinise. We don't have kind of direct dealings with the workings of Active Travel England day to day, but we're there to be a scrutiny board and a governance. So that is really great, and it gives me an insight into the great work that they're doing. It's still quite a young organisation, but I think it is having an impact, which is fantastic. What else do I do? Well, I do a lot of design reviews, so that's really interesting. We have a system in the UK. I'm not sure how prevalent it is in Australia, but we have a system of independent design review, and this is usually fits in with the development industry, actually. So when schemes, whether it's new housing or office developments or whatever, really, is going through the planning system, and the local authority decides whether to grant it consent or not, there's encouragement to have an independent panel who've had no previous involvement in the project at all and don't have any power of decision making, but they will look at the scheme and just give their honest view of what they think of it from a purely design quality point of view and how could it be made better. And I sit on a number of those. So some are kind of place-based. So Cambridgeshire, for example, I sit on one that looks at planning applications in Cambridgeshire, and some are associated with big infrastructure programs. So National Highways has a panel. So sometimes we're called on to look at big road schemes and how can they be made better, if you can. And actually, usually you can. You can usually find something to say, well, you haven't quite thought of this, and maybe you could do this a little better. So that I find really interesting and keeps me quite busy. But I also take part. These days I do on the side do a little bit of advocacy, and so I occasionally, I do quite a bit of pro bono work and speak for different groups. Sometimes 20's Plenty, the campaign group, and the Walking and Cycling Alliance. I've done some work pro bono with. So yeah, a whole kind of range of stuff, really, paid and unpaid.
Fantastic. Well, we can clearly see your passion because they're all, there's definitely a thread that is running through there. And it is interesting with the design reviews. I wasn't so aware of that, but it sounds like there's some space for innovation in there too. And when you're looking at things, how you can improve those designs and make an impact that really tangibly.
Yeah. I absolutely love doing design review. Mainly because I find it such a great learning experience. So firstly, you have a really expert group of people who've designed something, and they will present to you all of their thinking. So we can learn from that, and then go and steal their ideas on the next project. So that's always
we won't tell anyone.
That's always really good.
Some good heads around the room too. Yeah, you're all thinking. Yeah, it's great.
But also, but learning from your fellow panel. I mean, usually I'm the only transport person on the panel, and then I'm usually sat with architects and landscape architects and sustainability experts and energy experts. So we look at this building or this thing or whatever, or this master plan, and everyone looks at it through their own lens. And sometimes we disagree, which is really great. And so we, you get a discussion going on here, and then the poor chair of the panel has to draw this thing together and come up with some conclusions. So yeah, design. If as I say, I'm not sure how well embedded they are in Australia, but it is a really, really interesting process and one that's been supported for many years in the UK.
Fantastic. So we mentioned Lee Waters. You are just back actually from Australia, aren't you? You joined Lee trip on that fantastic tour around many, many cities. So I think you went to nearly all of the major cities except for Brisbane.
I did bail out. So I left Lee in Canberra, and then he went on to Adelaide and Melbourne. Okay. So I had to get back.
You've got offices here, so it's not your first trip to Australia. You're pretty familiar with what's going on here in the landscape with active travel. What's your sort of impressions of how we're travelling here in Australia in regards to active travel compared to what you're seeing back in the UK?
I would say it's not so very different. I mean, I think when we come here, when some of us coming from the UK and we speak about things, we always try and speak about the best, don't we? And show off our best stuff. And maybe people in Australia might get the impression that it's really good in the UK for active travel. Yeah, I mean, there are some good aspects, and I think there's been some fantastic progress in places like London, and Cambridge is doing really well, and other cities. Nottingham is doing well, but it's still quite patchy. So there's many parts of the UK where there is resistance, a lack of appreciation of the importance of designing for cycling and walking. And maybe Australia, I think, is perhaps not so different. This is my impression that, again, some of the cities are getting it. I was really fortunate, visited some of the bike lanes and bike facilities with Fiona Campbell in Sydney.
The
When Lee and
fantastic
I were
Fiona.
there.
She's great.
She was great. She took us out. There were beautiful Kalkoff electric bikes, and just because it's quite a hilly place, isn't it, Sydney? But we were up and down, and it was fantastic. So I mean, you can really see that they're there, and I know Melbourne is doing stuff, and Perth it's got a real commitment, I think, on some of its major highways to do, which we don't have in the UK. Our National Highways organisation, which looks after the main roads, it's still very patchy implementation of cycle facilities. Whereas I think in Western Australia, yes, they're building a lot of big roads, but there seems to be a commitment to always put in the bike facilities with them. So I think there's some really good stuff happening in Australia, but probably like the UK, needs to go further and faster.
Well, thank you for being so charitable about Australia. I want to turn back to Active Travel England, because we don't really have an equivalent in Australia yet, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I'd like to ask you two things about that. Firstly, without putting you on the spot, and we don't need exact numbers, we wouldn't know anyway. But if you could firstly paint a picture of roughly how many employees they might have now and what their annual budget would be.
Yep.
And then secondly, I attended the Parliamentary Friends of Cycling group in Canberra where you spoke, and you talked about their active travel capability ratings, which I found very interesting indeed. So if you could speak a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so Active Travel England is quite small. When it was set up, it was capped at 98 full-time equivalent people, and then I think with some government cuts, it came down to 90. So it's really quite a small organisation. It was promised, I think the figure was about £1 billion, so it's about $2 billion. But the economy in the UK is not going so well at the moment, and progressively that was cut. And I think at the moment it is working its way through its last Fund 4, Active Travel Fund 4, which I think was about another £100 million, something like that. Now, obviously groups are pushing for a new round of funding. The Department of Transport would always say, well, we're not a highway authority. We are just a ministry. We can make policy and we can offer guidance, but we don't make standards, and we can't tell highway authorities, local authorities that is, how to spend their money, because they're the technical experts here, and we just give them the money and we trust them to do the right thing. And I think, when you come to kind of road building and major junctions and things like that, there is that expertise in highway authorities for sure, and it's always been there, and it's still within the consultancies that supply them. But when it came to cycling in particular, I think a lot of campaigners would say, and advocates, that the money wasn't always spent wisely by local authorities, and the quality of provision that we were getting in the UK compared to, say, the Netherlands was pretty poor. So Active Travel England is there to raise the quality of provision through inspection. So one of its key functions is to inspect the work of local authorities. And to put a bit of teeth to that, they've come up with the idea of the local authority rating system. And this is the first time the Department of Transport has ever done anything like this, has ever kind of inspect that. And that's not true of other arms of government. So, education inspects schools and health inspects hospitals and doesn't just trust them to do the right thing. But for some reason, transport has always just left highway authorities to do their thing. And so they invented the rating system. It has a scale of 0 to 4. So 4 would be, and you might have cities like Utrecht and Amsterdam and Copenhagen on that list, and there are no UK local authorities at level 4, which I think is quite interesting. So even the best ones have got something to aspire to. There's a handful at level 3, and then the majority of level 1 and level 2, and then you've got again a handful on level 0. And it's really it's called capability, but actually it also includes political ambition. So it's not just how skilled the officers are or their supply chain designing for active travel. It's also about how committed they are to perhaps reallocating road space, taking away some parking spaces. Are they willing to do that? And it's had quite an effect, and it's really interesting that the press have picked up. So some authorities on level 0, local press have then used that as a bit of a stick to beat them, because that's what local press like to do. Usually they're complaining when they're building bike lanes, but this is flipping it over the way. This is saying, why is our local authority so bad at building bike lanes? And so that's galvanized a few to kind of get their act together and get them higher up the rankings. What it means, though, is that when active traveling does have money, it affects what money they will give them. So hopefully, as if more budgets come through in future, then that will give, I think, greater strength to the capability ratings, because it's the amount of money and the complexity of the scheme. So if you're a level 0 or level 1 authority and your ambition is to do some really grand facility that is very complex and involves a lot of public relations to get it right, ATE would say, well, we're not even sure you're quite at that level. Here's, if you want some money, do this, do these easier things first, whether it's some better pedestrian crossings, which is a bit more kind of routine, and demonstrate that you can deliver that well and bring the public with you. And then then we'll give you some more money, and we'll give you money for more complex things. So so far it's proved very successful, and it's really interesting that the Department of Transport has looked at it and think, and I mean, whether they're thinking of doing that on other areas, I don't know, but it has attracted a lot of interest, and I think congratulations for other parts of government for doing something quite innovative.
So that cuts across something we were discussing before this recording about the intersection or interaction between the technical advisors and the political will.
Yeah.
And you said that that's an area of interest. And so from your perspective as a technical consultant, if you like, how do you think that interface can be improved between the technical and the political?
I think, first of all, those of us who spend all our time, writing reports and producing spreadsheets and gathering data and evidence, we firstly have to recognise that actually that doesn't convince many people. Danny Williams, who's the chief exec of Active Travel England, a really smart guy, he said, as soon as we start talking numbers, people fall asleep. People just, I found this in spades on the Welsh work. If someone is convinced that what you're saying is wrong, it doesn't matter how much evidence you give them. They won't say, oh yeah, I thought I was wrong, but now you've shown me that chart, I realised how wrong I was, and I now agree with you. They don't do that. People defend their position. They take their position for all kinds of reasons. They have beliefs, underlying beliefs and systems, and they suspect your motives. And if you present evidence that tells them they're wrong, they'll actually question the evidence and say, well, that can't be the evidence. I'm right. I know I'm right. The evidence must be wrong. And they'll just question that, and they'll keep picking holes in the evidence and the whole conspiracy theory thing. So I think firstly we have to just recognise, and that's not to say evidence isn't important. It really is, because we have to, certainly our decision makers have to have that, because they need to defend that. If they're going to make a difficult decision, they have to have the evidence to push back and say, no, we're right. So the evidence is really important, but I think we just have to recognise that it's not enough, that we have to be much smarter. And I'm not even sure that transport professionals are the right people to do this. I think, again, working with comms, people who really understand public opinion and advertising, and how people really get their ideas and people really get their beliefs. The technical experts need to work much more closely with those people, because they're in the business of understanding and changing public opinion. That's what advertisers do, isn't it? They sell us something we didn't really know we wanted, and they convince us that they're convinced that we want it, even though we didn't think we did. And that and that's the game that we're in, I think. Because if you ask people, if and this is Chris Boardman, I think, gets it. He talks about that, and I've heard him speak, a number of times, obviously, and about what convinces people. And if you say to people, do you want a better bike route through your neighborhood? They say no, because I don't cycle. Cyclists, I don't like cyclists. There's nasty, sweaty people, who jump the red lights. I don't identify with them. So if you're talking to me about cycling, that's not of interest to me. But if it's, would you like your children to have a greater freedom? Would you like to breathe cleaner air? Would you like your house prices to better? Would you like to know your neighbours better? Would you like to sleep better at night? Would you like less traffic? Those are the kind of things that they can get to grips with and understand. And so we have to just, work out how, because we know that a world with fewer cars and a few more bikes is a good place. It will be a better place. But it's how do we package that up in a way that resonates with people, I think. And it's not easy, but I think that's the challenge that we face.
So speaking of public opinion, I believe that certain members of the public in Wales actually actively petitioned against you reviewing 20 mile an hour speed limits.
Yeah,
I read that in a media report when I was doing some research. So how did that make you feel, and what was the ultimate outcome of that? Did you end up doing the review, or where's that up to?
No, it was quite difficult actually, and it gave me the tiniest taste of what politicians must face. I chaired the 20 mile an hour task force, which recommended to Welsh government how to do the 20 miles an hour, and then after that they accepted the recommendations and went ahead with the project, and then I was invited to chair the steering group as a kind of external chair, just to draw together all the different threads of government, and that was really interesting, and saw the project all the way through to implementation, which was September 2023 when the law changed, and overnight over 90% of Welsh urban roads became 30 kilometres, 20 miles an hour. Backlash was intense. A petition was signed of nearly 500,000 people, which is about a sixth of the population of Wales, I think, against this thing, and the politicians were being vilified. And one of the criticisms was that the implementation across Wales wasn't consistent. So in South Wales, more roads were kept back at 30 miles an hour, 50 kilometres, than they were in North Wales. And so there was a difference of process. There was inconsistency that was charged at the government. So what Lee Waters then said was, he was under a lot of pressure, and he announced a review. And the review wasn't into how this whole project had gone. The review was about how local authorities had gone about the process of deciding which roads to keep at 30. So, and he felt that was quite reasonable for me to lead on, because I'd been intimately involved, not in the work of the local authorities, but in setting the policy under which they were working. And so I was reviewing how well they'd done it. And that was announced. But of course, the opposition politicians, jumped on this and said, this is completely unfair. The guy who's been advising you for 5 years, you're now asking to review the project. And that wasn't what I was doing, but that's what they said. And that's what the media got hold of. So it blew up. And and what was really surprising and not very pleasant was that I started getting some abusive emails and messages, but so did the company. So our company Facebook account started getting a lot of abuse, and our company LinkedIn started getting a lot of abuse. And I remember one of our staff, who got absolutely nothing to do with this at all, was getting abuse on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is meant to be this kind of professional place, isn't it, where we all kind of polite to each other, and it was even there. And so we had to close down our company accounts for a while. And I had to kind of, we had an online briefing of all our staff. I had to go and talk to all of our staff and explain to them what was going, because they were reading it. Of course, they were reading the press reports and thinking, well, yeah, I understand that. This is really unfair. Obviously, yeah, we know Phil and he's doing this, but this doesn't sound right to me. And I had to explain, no, it's not what the press is saying it is. Anyway, so that was pretty unpleasant for a while. And then actually, after Lee stood down, the review was meant to go on for longer, but Lee stood down, and then the new Transport Minister decided to kind of call an end to the work that we were doing. He wanted a change of faces, and that was completely understandable. But we did finish our review, and it is published, and it led to some new guidance. So now local authorities in Wales are working under some new government guidance, and as a result of that, some of the roads that are now 20 miles an hour will probably go back to 30. But it won't be a massive change. It'll just be a bit of a tweaking, but that is still to play out, and hopefully the thing will then kind of settle down. But yeah, it was interesting for a while.
What a fantastic initiative, though, because I think there's been some great results that are starting to come through, though. The proof in the pudding takes some time to cook, doesn't it?
I mean, there's a company, Agilicis, don't mind mentioning them, who the road safety specialists, and they have access to real-time information on traffic speeds that comes through in-car GPS systems. And within a week, they published a report that showed that average speeds were down just under 3 miles an hour, which are about 5 kilometers an hour, which is pretty much in line with expectations. And it doesn't sound a big number, but is really a lot. The rule of thumb that researchers pointed to, that for every 1 mile per hour, so 1.6 kilometers, 6% reduction in collisions. So 3 miles per hour is nearly 20% reduction.
That's amazing. Yeah,
it's a lot, and then what's been found, so after 6 months, we've only got 6 months of post-implementation data. The next 3 months will be out pretty soon now. Casualties are down just under 30% on 20 and 30 mile an hour roads.
wow.
So that's remarkable,
Yeah,
in 6 months.
yeah.
So yeah, that's quite astonishing. And yeah, and it was never claimed that 20 miles an hour would be a panacea. We know that of itself it won't bring speeds down enough, and they'll have to go back and do further work. But over time, the view is that compliance will increase. And but in terms of cost effectiveness, it is the most cost effective thing. I mean, it costs £30 million, $60 million to do the signs, which a lot of opponents said was a huge amount of money. Actually, it's a drop in the ocean really for government spending. I haven't crunched the numbers, but it won't be very long before based on official values of a casualty saving, which are run to hundreds of thousands of pounds for a serious injury. It doesn't take very many to win back that investment, and in terms of benefit to society. So it'll pay for itself very quickly.
Well, I think this is another thing that you should feel very proud of in your career, because it is amazing. Every life saved is a fantastic thing. So
it is.
I'd like to know what advice you might have for countries like Australia or New Zealand that are in some ways so far behind, this great work that has happened in Wales and England.
I came to the AITPM conference in Perth again this year, which is really great event. Kirsty Kelly, the chief exec, did a fantastic job, and Fiona Goodbody of organising the conference. And they launched a policy paper about decarbonising the transport system in Australia, which I thought was really, really fantastic. And it called on government to scale back the investment in road building. And I think that maybe that's I suppose my underlying thing is we've gone on really for decades now, since the Second World War and maybe before, in just continually making it easier to drive, and that's what we do. We keep building roads, and we build car parks, and we still do it in the UK. I was talking to somebody the other day, when they're planning new schools and building drop-off areas for parents. On the one hand, we've got a government that's saying we want more children to walk and cycle to school, and then some local authorities are building car parks for schools just for parents to make it more convenient for them to drop their kids by car. And you think, what is this? So I think just fundamentally, we've got to just say, how much do we want to continue to make it easy to drive? And that means by increasing capacity and doing all those things. Because I actually think what we have to just do is start to tilt the balance in the other direction, and that's not easy. We know that's not easy. It's certainly not easy to go out of your way to make things harder to drive, cost more or more congested or whatever. But at least as a starting point, we could stop making it easier. And I think that's perhaps where the UK is still doing that. We're not so wealthy these days, so probably our roads program is being curtailed as much because of lack of budget. But Australia is a wealthier country, and it's still investing huge amounts of money in road building. So I would maybe firstly echo the calls that AITPM made just for government to kind of rethink that. I can still remember, as a child, having such a lot of freedom to go out and meet friends and play, and then being called in. And I just fear so much for our children's lives these days. you see these diagrams of the shrinking freedom of children across generations, how far they're allowed to go, and these days children almost spend their lives in their bedroom. They're not even in the rest of the house; they're just in one room. And that, I think, just recognizing the benefits, particularly to people like that, to children and to older people, for the freedom that they get, and that when you often lose your independence in older life, when you can't use a car.
There's a mental health benefits as well as the physical, the well-being.
Absolutely. Yeah. I read something the other day about the value of acquaintances. We talk about friends and our friendship groups, but apparently acquaintances are really good for us. People that we just see, people that we see on the street that we don't really, you might not even know their names, anything about them, but we see that same person and we nod to them, or maybe you know them well enough, to or go to things like parkrun, and we see the same people week in, week out, and you get this kind of recognition of another person. It validates us as human beings, and apparently that is really good for our mental health.
Yes, and that's not something you get when you're whizzing by in a car.
You don't get in a car, and you probably don't get on Facebook, or do you? You do those. You don't get that, and you get that by being outdoors and seeing people, and just so I think if we begin to kind of appreciate the two sides of the coins, the harms that cars do in all kinds of ways, and maybe we just need to stop making it a little bit easier and recognize the benefit, such a range of benefits that we get from being active and outdoors ourselves, of people of all ages. I think if we can just begin to put those two things together on the balance and tip it the other way, that would be my kind of wish, really.
That makes absolute sense. Wise words. Thank you. So listen, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think you've shared some really great insights. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for being on the Micromobility Report podcast.
Thank you both.
Well, Irene, what were some of the interesting things you thought came out of that chat with Phil?
I really like Phil. Isn't he just such a wealth of knowledge? He's so humble, actually, I think, given the amount of the breadth of things that he's involved in, yet he's generally so down to earth, as we would say in Australia, and very easy and approachable. I thought your question was great, actually, to sort of really unpack what is the capability rating that has been used in the UK, because I think his explanation was probably one of the best explanations that I've heard. It is interesting to sort of turn things on the head, as he said, now people are saying, well, why isn't my council good at building bike lanes? Why are they out of one? And creating some FOMO, fear of missing out, that other local authorities actually getting more funding, more attention, because they've not brought their skills up. But it shows the gap in I guess the skills and the capability of what local authorities are capable of doing, and there is that sort of people are trained to build roads and highways. The skills are just not as good as they could be in regards to active travel. And that's why I really like speaking with Kylie Nixon as well, who was on our podcast recently, because here we've got an engineer who really cycles herself, and that's not always a thing, which is why the guidance and standards are so important, and then making sure they comply to those, and then mixing it with political will as well.
Absolutely, and I would like to see that rating system implemented in Australia for all local governments in Australia. I think it would be a great thing to see, and hopefully we'll see the day when that happens here. So we'll roll over to our final segment that we do each month, which we're calling What's Up, not to be confused with What's Up Doc. In this case, it's the question, what's up, Irene?
So for me, I've got quite a lot of conferences coming up. So this week in Brisbane, we have the iMove R&D conference, which is looking at transport, innovation in transport, the latest stuff that's been showcased in terms of projects that iMove have carried out. So I'm really excited to be on a panel talking about the future of transport planning, and obviously I'll be talking about what we do with C-Sense and our data use cases, particularly building on from our iMove project down in Melbourne with the Transport Accident Commission and a couple of the councils down there. So really excited to talk about innovative use cases for our data. Then I'll be down in Melbourne the following week for a couple of meetings, and then I'm going to tie that in and pop in to check out the Mobility Live conference. So I don't know if you've been to that one, Phil, but
actually I chaired or hosted a micromobility mini conference within that last year when I was at Darling Harbour at the International Convention Centre. But this year it's down in Melbourne, so I think you'll enjoy it.
Okay, yeah, good. There does seem to be a bit of active travel on the first day, at least a little bit less on the second day, but quite interested to see what that's like. And then I think I've got one more conference before we'll come back and record our next podcast. And I'm very excited to be heading over to Barcelona for the Smart City Expo. And I'll be speaking there as well, sharing some of our innovative projects, one of them working with Transport for London, who used our data for their Vision Zero agenda in terms of trying to understand risk for cyclists and use data to understand before and after and all sorts of stuff. So I'm very excited to be heading to Barcelona and speaking.
How's your Spanish, Irene?
Uh, not so good, but to be honest, I have actually been to this conference quite a few times, and it's a little bit sad that I don't get to see as much as Barcelona as I would like. You might get the odd meal. Pretty much, it's hard graft, to be honest. You're in the
Let me just get my violin out. Where is it? I think
Nobody believes me. The life of a startup founder is not that glamorous. I'll be staying in some kind of cheap hotel and working so hard during the day.
Oh my goodness. Let me just
Yeah.
tune up that violin.
Although last time I did go, I did manage to squeeze in on the very last evening a ride on the chairlift. There's a chairlift that takes you up to one of the mountains just outside of Barcelona and you get the lovely view. That was absolutely spectacular. So if I can find time to do that again, I'll definitely do that. And I'm very excited to catch up with a lot of my pals. The whole Northern Ireland, Invest Northern Ireland, Belfast crew are going to be there. Lots of the UK is going to have a stand there this year for the first time. So there'll be lots of different local authorities and hopefully some friendly faces for me to chat to. The Dublin crew will all be there. So yeah, it's going to be great from that point of view as well. The acquaintances that you mentioned.
That's right. Good for your
That's
mental
it.
health,
It's a mental
Irene.
health trip.
That's
What about
right.
yourself, Phil?
Well, as I mentioned last time, our media business, including the LATS report and micromobility report, is currently on the market. But I just want to re-emphasize, in case anyone ever reads one of our newsletters that or goes on the website where it's been announced, that regardless of what happens with that process, we're going to be continuing this podcast, even if it might get a rename at some stage. And we'll do one more podcast for December and then have a break for Christmas holidays. So I don't think there'll be one coming out in January, but we'll kick off again in February. And finally, Phil Jones made me aware of the Streets Ahead podcast. It's 3 people, Adam Tranter, Laura Laker, and Ned Bolting. And I must admit, I didn't know about that podcast until I spoke to Phil the other day in preparation for this interview that we've just done. I've already almost finished my 3rd episode of their podcast. I'm planning to listen to more, so I'd really recommend that podcast. They just did a great interview with the new UK Secretary of State for Transport, in other words, their Federal Transport Minister, Louise Haigh, and it was a fantastically positive interview after they'd been on a bike ride, actually, Laura Laker and Chris Boardman, who was just mentioned by Phil in the interview we've just done, but they went on a bike ride with this new Secretary of State for Transport. And then she gave an interview that was very candid. And in fact, it was picked up the next day, the next morning. It was on the BBC morning program. It was on the front cover of the Times newspaper and just massive national media. which for a little podcast, that was a great achievement. So would recommend people look up that podcast and have a listen. It's excellent. Anything else from you to wrap up, Irene?
Yeah, just to reiterate, I think it's a lovely podcast, and there's a nice sort of mix of different skills. You've got Adam Tranter, he was a previous cycling commissioner in the West Midlands under the previous mayor, and he has a PR background as well, his own sort of PR company. So he understands communication, and actually he was responsible for a very good little video. I don't know if you ever saw that, part of the Bikers Best campaign when he was there. You see that with a really good,
with the milk going in the back of the pickup
having the
truck?
right tool for the job. I love that video. That's really
Mm.
good. And Laura Laker, she's more of a journalist, but she's got a book out, Potholes and Pavements.
That's right. And in fact, the Transport Minister had read that book and was a fan and followed Laura on her social media and contacted Laura, not the other way around. Normally, to get to speak to a senior federal minister, good luck.
Well, that's
But
encouraging.
the minister contacted
Right.
her.
Okay.
So that's incredible.
Yeah. That's quite encouraging. That's very positive, as you say. So
It is.
I need to go and listen to that episode.
It's well worth a listen. So, and I'm more than happy to plug anyone else's podcast, because as you know, we're certainly not in this as empire building. We're in this to try and advance the cause of cycling and micromobility.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So on that positive note, I'd say to everyone, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.